Hi, hello guys, my name is Mia Marie and you are currently watching my Synastry Compatibility series where I go through all the 12 signs, sun signs, and how they get along. Now, as a general disclaimer, we reference so much more than just the sun sign for compatibility, but the importance of the sun and understanding someone's sun sign and accepting it and supporting it is that the sun sign describes the motives, the behaviors, the experiences that contribute to someone's sense of sanity. So we're not talking so much about what someone needs emotionally or how they flirt or what makes them great in bed, all of those very, romantic topics. We're talking about how to support someone's vitality, someone's sense of self, and someone's healing human journey. So keep in mind that this is just a gentle introduction, and you can get so much more by booking a session with me or another fantastic astrologer. 90% of my dad's side of the family is Gemini, so I have been around this energy my whole life. Gemini is the third sign of the zodiac, and so we're still in that personal perspective quadrant as it relates to what the soul wants to do. What does the soul want to do when you're a sun in Gemini? The motive behind all behavior, thoughts, failures, projects, sanity is to lovingly communicate wisdom. Gemini goes around asking questions, collecting information. So when you say you don't like something, Gemini hears, oh, they must not understand it. And they explain to you why you don't like it and where this person is coming from. And the walls start to crumble. And in the place of walls, we have acceptance. We have mutual understanding and connectedness. That's the blessing of Gemini. If you ever dated a Gemini or you're dating one now, you'll recognize that they are always working the room, partially because they're an air sign and they need to communicate. It contributes to their vitality and their life force and their life mission, but also because when you talk to people, you get stories. And Gemini is great at listening to stories. It wants an interesting story, but it's also a gifted storyteller. And in every story is a lesson. And so that's what they're doing when they're going around working the room. And you can be sitting there thinking, oh, am I just not interesting enough? You're always all over the place. You're always talking to people. Why can't you just sit here and be with me now? And the real answer, my genuine response to that is no, they can't just sit there. I mean, on an isolated instance, of course, but if you expect Gemini to sit down next to you and you guys do things together, I mean, unless you can keep up, unless you're just as quick-witted, then that's fine. But if you want them to stay in place, no, they want to work the room. So as I was saying, Gemini is an air sign, which means that it's fueled by communication and intellect. It realizes like, oh, I have a brain and my brain can think different thoughts and these thoughts create realities. Now, because it's this air element is expressed through Gemini, Gemini is focused on collecting information for itself and its immediate environment. So it will likely be a teacher to its family, its children, its partner, its community at large, right? That would be a large expression of Gemini. Usually it's like a classroom of people or a group of people is who it's teaching and talking to. But it's really focused on building a library of information about the world. It wants to squeeze 10 lifetimes into one. They're also known to be duplicitous in nature. Geminis are two-faced, phony, and fickle. The explanation for that is actually quite simple, and the terminology might sound similar. I'm just going to say it first. They have an inner child that just will not quit. Now, I know in mainstream, social media, we hear about inner child healing. They're not focused on inner child healing. There's just a child that wants to play and have fun and engage with life for all the selfish reasons. But then there is this mature adult who has learned and developed and can impart wisdom. And so they teeter between the two in social interactions depending on how they feel. And they enjoy that they can choose to be an adult or a child in any given situation. They also have the legacy of being non-committal. And when I hear that, I think about their mythological parallel. and it's the messenger between the worlds. It's the only character in mythology that doesn't have a home. And I see this through and through with Gemini characters. They want to be on the move. In mythology, the messenger goes from heaven to earth to hell over and over again because it's collecting as much information. As I said before, that's what it lives for. That's what it wants, and that's what it's good at. In fact, it's the only energy that can move in that way. And so when a Gemini thinks about a relationship, it thinks that it has to stay still, that it can't have freedom anymore, or that it is it's liable to someone somewhere, that someone is waiting on them. And even though they may not act like they don't care, it's something that weighs on their mind, like, oh man, I'm not showing up for this person, or I'm not doing this. And it just creates ambivalence towards the idea of relationship. But Gemini is good at relationship once they find someone who they vibe with, who can speak the same language. Or if you can't speak the same language and you're not doing the same things, can exert tolerance and acceptance and encouragement towards their desire to stay on the move. Some deal breakers for Gemini: they don't like a negative Nancy. Anyone who is overly emotional, gets lost in emotions, has a heaviness to their aura, to their vibe, is going to repel them because it's the opposite of what they want. It's the opposite of what makes them feel stable within themselves, even though, you know, they are constantly in motion. I wouldn't consider them to be the most stable. Another thing they can't stand is if you can't have a conversation, playful, witty banter, if you're not intellectual, if you're not learning, if you're not stimulated by ideas and thoughts and theories, and you can't contribute to their overall development as it relates to the intellect and the mind, they're going to get bored and they're going to find you uninteresting. You don't listen, or you're unable to understand what they're communicating. Gemini people, I hear this the most from them. When they have relationship complaints, it's, I don't feel heard. I don't feel understood. I don't feel like you get me. And they're not talking about their vibe. They're talking about what they're literally saying to you. It's like falling on deaf ears. They have the gift of the gab. They want it appreciated. You have to also have an appreciation for humor, because for them, life is a joke. The whole thing is the joke until it's not, and their little child comes out and everything really matters. It's super important. But for the most part, they like to, poke fun at you, and they don't want you to have a full-blown tantrum. So all in all, Gemini is the third sign of the zodiac. It's intellectual. It's here to create a story. It's trying to collect a lot of information. It's a socially oriented sign, and it requires freedom, and not because it doesn't like you or doesn't love you, but because it's trying to stay sane. It's trying to develop, and it's trying to grow. Sun in Scorpio. These people come into Earth with a sole motive of transforming lower desires into higher will by being a spiritual warrior. And they often do this by examining pain. Now, I heard this quote today, and it made me think of Scorpio, irregardless of gender. But it was saying that you can either play victim or play the villain. And I think this is beautiful Scorpio energy, because oftentimes they find themselves being a depository for the shittiest human experiences. It's almost like they've come to wrestle with the worst of humanity, especially as it relates to emotions. And so oftentimes they are victim, but you rarely ever hear a Scorpio characterize themselves as the victim. Instead, they take on the villain mentality. Now, I'm not saying all Scorpios are villains, but that was just something that I heard today that made me think of them. Scorpio is the second water sign, so it's socially oriented. And so it has this desire to establish a cohesive social order. It recognizes what needs to be eliminated, and it just slices it at the knees. If you've ever had a Scorpio boss, they can be cutthroat. They often have some kind of relationship with inheritance or shared resources. They often do things with a partner, and it's because they rule the house of intimacy and shared resources. At least in their younger years, Scorpio is very afraid of being ostracized or socially alienated for liking or partaking in things that would be considered taboo or atypical. But this is like something they totally get off to. Scorpio offers love in a really interesting but uncomfortable way. I mean, true to form, right? And I'll use an example. So, a Scorpio hasn't seen a friend in a year, and they're so excited to reconnect with someone, and they meet them in person and they recognize that it looks like their friend has aged 10 years. And in this 1 year, they've gained 40 pounds. A Scorpio is going to say, "Oh my God, you've gained so much weight. Are you okay?" Now, society would look at that and say, "That's rude and inappropriate." And in a Scorpio's mind, it's like, well, that's truthful. Are you okay? And that's the point that I want to highlight is they nurture and nourish the soul by pointing out something that everybody can see, but no one wants to talk about because it's so uncomfortable. And then the friend goes into it and they start talking about this terrible divorce and how they were betrayed and how they're dealing with trauma. And Scorpio sits there unfazed, totally supportive. And by the end of the conversation, the friend has a new awareness of their overall mental well-being. Now, when Scorpio shares their perspective, they're not meaning to cause harm. They're essentially saying, "I'm paying attention to you." And after that conversation ends, they've done something profound. They've used the truth to set their friend free from a situation that was not serving them. They nourished the soul, but not in the way that we would expect or in a way that makes us feel coddled. Scorpio does not coddle. And that's an act of healing. Scorpios are healing. They do the surgical, dirty work where they cut people open and they fix what's broken. They fix what's not working. A second example, and I swear this all builds to a point, so stick with me. A second example is that these parents are taking their young child who's a Scorpio to see the child's grandfather who's in the hospital, very ill. The child goes in, observes the condition of grandpa, has a gut instinct and feeling. The parents get back in the car and they drive the child home. On the way home, the child says, "Wow, grandpa's really sick. He's going to die soon." Mom slams on the brakes, looks back and says, "Don't say that." A taboo subject. Now, a year later, grandpa passes away. The child was right. That gut instinct, that feeling was correct. But what the child learns in that moment is that what they think, what they see, what they feel, the truth, when they speak the truth, it hurts. It hurts other people. And so what happens in their younger years is they stop talking. And you see this oftentimes with men. Women who come to me with their Scorpio partner are like, "Oh my God, they always said Scorpios are so emotional, but he never talks. He's so quiet. He keeps to himself." It's like, yeah, this is someone who's been socially conditioned to keep their mouth shut or they're going to be ostracized. Scorpio is they don't want to be socially ostracized because they're here to be intimate with people. Taurus is mine. Scorpio represents ours. It's always in contract with somebody. It rules contracts. It's the manufacturer. It's the company. Now, the way that they love is through truth. And so they need a partner who, when they go to those extreme places, because life sees to it that Scorpio has what could be considered traumatic or extreme circumstances and conditions. So they need someone who can withstand the emotional storms that Scorpio goes through without being negatively impacted. Another example that I'll use as it relates to Scorpio characters is if a Scorpio has been going through, let's say they have a divorce, they lost their job, their health is going down the drain, and they're recognizing that their life is falling apart. And they confide in a friend and they say, "Right now, I feel like committing suicide." Now, this is heavy, but I think that this is true for Scorpios. The friend is probably going to say, "What?" No, they're not saying they're going to do it. They just say they feel like it. Most people will listen to that and say, "Don't do that. You need to see a psychologist. Like something is wrong with you." Someone who can be in bed with Scorpio will sit there and say, "If I were you, I would feel that same way too." There is no avoidance of the truth. There is no avoidance of deep, dark emotions, of realities that all humans, or humans have to withstand. Scorpio seems to get all of the lessons, all of the tough lessons. Hence why they are the spiritual warrior. But they require in partnership somebody who isn't afraid to hear the truth, who isn't afraid to be intimate, who isn't afraid to see all sides of a person as they develop and grow, as they win, as they lose, as they soar, as they fall. Once a Scorpio knows that it's safe with you, that it can be itself with you and you won't run away or like shake in your boots, that's when the soft, loving side comes out. They are extreme cuddlers. They love cuddling, they love hugging, they love being intimate, they like spending quality time together. They are also incredibly ambitious and usually extremely successful because they have like an iron fist and a velvet glove. They know how to get shit done and they know how to place people in the right roles. They are like the master when it comes to organizing a company and making sure that things go as planned. They're on top of their shit and they make sure that you are also living up to your potential, because oftentimes if they're in business with you, if they're hiring you, you are a reflection of them and their product or their service. And so they hold you to your highest potential as well. They are also soulful lovers. Like, I think they believe in soulmates. I think that they want that type of deep, unbreakable bond. They would die for you. And more than that, they would live for you. Now, let's talk about some deal breakers. As I said, they are here to examine pain and to embrace truth. So if you are someone who will fabricate peace just to feel comfortable, you're not going to get along with a Scorpio. If you are trying to be polite and you sacrifice honesty in your intimate relationship, then they will also not trust you. If you are always polished and clean and poised, then they will be a little weary of you because what aren't you showing them? And also, if you agree all of the time with whatever they're doing or whatever they're saying, they're going to be suspicious because they understand how human psychology works. If two people are getting along perfectly all the time, then someone's not being honest. Someone's not showing up. Someone's not participating in the relationship. They want to wrestle with you sometimes. I'm not saying that these people love a fight, but they understand what it takes to be in an intimate, committed relationship with somebody. And full transparency, Scorpio, the 8th house is the pinnacle of the arc of intimacy in astrology. And so it is programmed for partnership and it does want connectivity, but it's like a cactus. You know, there's water inside, there's emotion inside, but you got to get through the pricks to get there. Sun in Gemini, Sun in Scorpio. I can see this being like a fiery fling, a playmate, someone who you have a great time with. But in terms of long-standing commitment, I do see some very obvious challenges that could be well assuaged by other things in your birth chart. But let's just jump right in. So Sun in Gemini, this is someone who is mutable, who is curious, who is all about asking questions of life. And they come in with these like, what are they? Magnifying glasses as eyes, and they're collecting as much data about the world as possible because they're trying to squeeze 10 lifetimes into one. They are playful and adaptable, and they are the only zodiac sign that doesn't mind not having a home or having multiple homes and constantly being on the move and traveling. It's a personally oriented sign, and it's an air sign, so it's focused on information and intellect and the fact, you know, that we have this prefrontal cortex that is capable of envisioning things that don't exist yet, and then our ability to bring it into the real world, 3D. And Scorpio is a water sign, so it is emotional, spiritual. It wants to talk about occult things and secrets and shadow areas of our lives, and it is, it's a water sign. And so they kind of wake up in different conditions. Scorpio wakes up fully charged. Gemini wakes up empty and needs to move to generate its body. And so, you know, we start off here in the day, and as the day goes on, we have that sweet spot where we get along and we have fun together and we make power moves. Gemini may be able to tell Scorpio what to do, and Scorpio may execute with just mastery. And they split again. So, you know, what you guys like to do to feel better, to recharge your body and your mind and your soul is going to be different. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something to keep in mind. Gemini needs to move to generate the energy that Scorpio gets just by sleeping. That's the way the cookie crumbles, folks. Now, Scorpio wants deep intimacy. It rules the 8th house of shared resources. So in Scorpio's mind, it's hard to exist without another. They can be positioned as like codependent or overbearing or smothering. And this is true, but at the same time, I don't say it like you're smothering. You know, their soul wants to know what it feels like to know someone intimately. Tell me who you really are. Don't sugarcoat shit. Tell me the truth. I want to see you. I want to trust you. And I want to walk through life with you is what a Scorpio wants to say. Gemini, Sun, now they could have Cancer placements and that would be fantastic because, you know, the Gemini humor and Scorpio loves to laugh and Scorpio is also funny in its own way. But if you threw some Cancer in that Gemini, oh, great, chef's kiss. But Gemini is just a sun sign, is going to go there with Scorpio from time to time, like go to the deep, dark areas of life, but only to collect information. So Scorpio might be talking about a traumatizing story about how they were a soldier in war. And Gemini's like, really? And so what time did you wake up? And what did you eat? And who did you bunk with? And where did you stay? And where did you go? And so they're talking about the same thing, but they're not taking the same things away from the experience. Gemini is not going to sit there and drop in and be like, wow, what happened? And tell me like about your dream, you know, like the Gemini is just going to want to take the information and put it in its messenger bag and move on. It doesn't want to stay there. It doesn't want to do the emotional footwork that's necessary to be in bed with a Scorpio, quite literally. And the example that I use, and if you've watched me say this before, then skip over it. But Scorpio is a deep sign. It's a water sign. And so in a pool, Scorpio is like 8 feet deep. And Gemini is like 4 feet deep. And so no matter how much, let's just say Gemini loves you to the fullest extent. For whatever reason, this is a match made in heaven. And Gemini loves you so much, Scorpio, that they are banging their head against the concrete. They're at 4 feet deep and they're trying and they're trying and they're trying and they're trying. 4 cannot fathom 8. They will never understand. They don't have the same ability, all other placements aside, to go to where you're at, nor do they have an interest because their goal is to collect information. So they're cerebral, they're intellectual. That's not their territory. That's not their assignment. It's not that they don't love you. It's not that they don't care about you. It's not that they don't want to be with you. It's just that they didn't come in with the tools that allow them to do the type of work that you came here to do. You want to be there. Right? You have something to uncover from there. And I say that as a fellow water sign myself, taking accountability over that. But what it can happen, and I will also validate this, is that you need to be in bed with your equal. That if someone can't access a major chunk of who you are, pretty soon that chunk is all that you see. And I'm aware of like that 70-30 rule where you find someone who meets 70% or 80%, whatever it is, of your needs. And then, you know, you figure out other ways to get the 30% met. But I think for a Scorpio and for all water signs in general, or people with strong water energy, that gap is so important because your sanity hinges on it. It's not just like, oh, you know, I can't talk to him about my emotions. It's like, well, that's what drives you. That's what fuels you. That's what feeds you. And so what is not so important to somebody else may be the only thing that your body will ingest as or recognize as nourishment and support. And so Scorpio will probably pull away. Scorpio will be the one to break off the relationship because it recognizes that it's not being fed. It might get off to that in the beginning and it might, you know, cause some serious like repercussions emotionally and spiritually for kind of going along with Gemini's escapist tendencies. I don't really see that happening though. I see Scorpio being like, this isn't for me. You know, it's just not working. And then on top of that, Gemini is fun and flirty. It doesn't like boundaries. It doesn't like commitment. And that is what Scorpio stands for, is what does commitment like for life? What does it look like? Like, how do we move through really tough, shady shit together? And Gemini is like, absolutely not. And so we do have a mismatch of energies here. Some positive areas is that they will have a shared sense of humor. They will get off to each other when circumstances are light and easy. Gemini will shine in a way that kind of reminds Scorpio to laugh. That laugh is a great way to move past tough emotions. And Gemini will really appreciate what Scorpio brings to the table romantically. There is like this devouring, delicious quality. Scorpio knows how to put on a performance or give an experience, even if it is a little bit more emotional and watery. Gemini will be like, whoa, I've never had that before. Like that, traveling to Scorpio, into Scorpio was an experience. And so I can see that being positive. I think that Scorpio, if they were working, say, in a business scene, I can see Gemini making all of like the overarching calls, but Scorpio being the one coming in like, this person is showing signs of this. I don't really trust that person. This person needs to be promoted. This person needs to be fired. And I can see Scorpio bringing the emotional intelligence and having that keen eyesight that can call out major tragedies before they happen. And I think Gemini will find that beneficial because Gemini won't immediately recognize emotional information or emotional intelligence as valuable until, it affects their dollar or until chaos sits before them. And so I think they could work really great as a tag team. But some problem areas, again, as I was saying, Gemini lacks the depth. Gemini wants to kind of skirt on the surface and move around as it pleases. That will not fly with Scorpio. Scorpio will find that behavior inappropriate and may even classify it as being like cheating, depending on the circumstance, if Gemini is out flirting with someone in public. So I can see that their energies just function in different ways and they need different things, and that they will both hopefully stay true to who they are. Now, again, everything matters. There are over 2,000 placements, configurations between you two as a couple, and this is just one of them. And it's important, right? Because you want to protect your person's sanity. That's their sun sign. Scorpio wants to be intimate. It wants to find the hard truth. It wants to understand why traumatic things happen to people. And it wants to learn how to love and accept people for who they are, but also remain courageous and strong in that space. And Gemini is someone who is just here to download all of this information and to dissolve intellectual barriers that keep us from becoming one. And so you can see how this energy kind of drives them in opposite directions. But, you never know. If you were to have a Gemini with the moon in Scorpio and a Scorpio rising, then that Scorpio character would be perfect for them. So you really just have to look at the details. If you would like to learn more, you can find me at wellandrising.com/services. Cheers!